If you were to stand by the River Thames on a misty morning in the 1400s, you would see it first, a fortress rising pale and cold from the fog, its towers reflected in the slow-moving water like the ghost of another world. The Tower of London. Even then, it was already old, a survivor from the days of William the Conqueror, when the Normans built it as both a symbol of power and a promise of fear. By the 15th century, it had become far more than a fortress. It was a royal palace, a prison, an armory, a treasury, and in many ways, the very center of England's heartbeat. The tower was not simply a building, it was a world unto itself, a city enclosed in walls of white stone, alive with voices, footsteps, and secrets. Imagine the air within those walls. The mingling sense of smoke, iron, tallow, and damp river wind. The murmur of guards patrolling the battlements. The echo of boots on cobblestones. And above it all, the distant bells of St. Peter ad Vincula, the small chapel within the tower grounds, chiming through the fog like a reminder that even here, amid power and punishment, there was still the presence of faith. Life inside the Tower of London in the 1400s was a delicate balancing act between magnificence and menace. It was a place where kings slept and traitors died, where jewels were guarded and secrets buried, and where the line between loyalty and betrayal was as thin as the blade of a sword. A fortress and a home. To the common people who lived outside its gates, the tower was the embodiment of royal authority. To those within its walls, it was something far more complex, a living organism that never slept. Its thick, cold stones held the warmth of hearth fires in winter, the laughter of servants, and the low murmur of noble conspiracies. The great white tower at its center stood as both throne and tomb, a monument to Norman architecture that still loomed with silent judgment over the courtyards below. Inside, rooms of carved oak and flickering candlelight sheltered the royal family and their retinues when the tower served as a residence. The royal chambers were surprisingly elegant, draped with colored tapestries, decorated with silver goblets, velvet cushions, and finely wrought iron sconces. But beyond those chambers, the mood changed quickly. The corridors grew colder, the air heavier, and the walls narrower, leading towards storerooms, armories, and the dreaded lower dungeons where daylight seldom reached. The sound of life and labor. From dawn to dusk, the tower thrummed with activity. At first light, the yeoman warders, the king's own guards, would make their rounds. The gates would creak open, and a slow procession of servants, cooks, and blacksmiths would begin their day. Fires were stoked in the kitchens. The clang of iron rang from the smithies, and from the stables near the byward tower came the stamping and snorting of horses, impatient for movement. The tower housed everything a royal household required: a bakery, the brewery, a mint where coins were struck, even a small menagerie of exotic animals given as gifts to the king. Lions, leopards, and bears were once kept within the walls, their roars echoing against the stone and startling passing guards. Visitors from foreign courts would whisper of these beasts, calling the tower both palace and cage, a fitting metaphor for the England it represented. The shadow of the crown. In the 1400s, England was a kingdom torn by turmoil. The 100 Years' War with France was drawing toward its bloody end, and civil conflict was beginning to simmer between rival factions of the royal family. The House of Lancaster and the House of York. The Tower, with its thick gates and iron locks, became the center of this tension. It was where kings crowned themselves in triumph, and where they imprisoned those who challenged their right to rule. During the reign of Henry VI, the Tower was both royal residence and eventual cell. Henry himself, a quiet and pious man, found his fortunes reversed, and in 1471, after his brief restoration to power, he was taken back to the Tower, not as king, but as captive. That night he died within its walls. The official story said illness. The whispers said murder. For those who lived within the Tower, such changes in fortune were not uncommon. One day, a noble might dine in the Great Hall. The next, he might find himself shackled in a cold cell beneath the same floorboards, listening to the same bells through a narrow slit of light. It was this dual nature, majesty above, misery below, that made the Tower of London so haunting. Even in times of peace, its shadows seemed to remember every secret, every cry, every broken promise. A city within walls. To live inside the Tower was to live in a place both protected and imprisoned. The servants who swept the corridors, the soldiers who guarded the gates, the smiths, the cooks, and the scribes, all of them formed a strange kind of community. Children were born within those walls. Laughter echoed in the courtyards, and though the Tower's outer appearance was severe, its inner life pulsed with warmth and rhythm. There were feast days and ceremonies. The royal kitchens would prepare roasted meats, honeyed fruits, and spiced wine. The smell would drift through the courtyards, mingling with river mist and torch smoke. Musicians played soft tunes on the lute. Even prisoners, sometimes of noble birth, might hear the faint melody from their chambers and be reminded painfully of the world above. The Tower was, in every sense, a paradox, a place of death that constantly reminded its inhabitants of life. The weight of the river, and always beyond its walls flowed the Thames, dark, slow, and watchful. Many who entered the Tower did so by river, gliding silently beneath Traitor's Gate, their faces pale in the torchlight. The water became their escort into the unknown. For others, the river was a comfort, a reminder that beyond the Tower's iron and stone, the living world went on. Ships passed, gulls called, and London streets bustled with ordinary life. Inside the walls, time seemed to move differently, slower, heavier, measured by the ringing of bells and the rhythm of guard shifts. The living fortress. In the 1400s, the Tower of London was not yet just a monument. It was alive. It breathed through the voices of its people, the crackle of its hearths, and the whispers of those who feared it. Every brick carried the weight of a story, every echo the ghost of a name. It was a reflection of the kingdom it served, beautiful and brutal, sacred and cruel, enduring yet ever-changing. And as night fell, the torches would flicker along the battlements, the gates would lock, and the Tower would fall into a strange, uneasy stillness. The world beyond would sleep, but inside these walls, the past never truly did. Section 2. The Daily Life Within the Tower, a World Behind the Walls. When we imagine the Tower of London today, it stands silent, a monument of stone and history. But in the 1400s, it was anything but silent. It was a place of motion, rhythm, and routine, a self-contained city, alive with every sound and scent of medieval life. Inside its walls, hundreds of men and women lived, worked, ate, and prayed, creating a strange harmony between duty and survival. To understand the tower's power, one must step into the rhythm of a single day within it. Dawn to dusk, life to shadow, morning, the awakening of stone. Before the first rays of light touched the Thames, the tower was already stirring. The guards of the night watch, weary, cloaked, and bleary-eyed, began to trade places with the day's warders. Iron keys clanked in the cold air as heavy doors creaked open. The soft shuffle of boots echoed down long corridors where torches burned low, leaving trails of smoke along the vaulted ceilings. The yeoman warders, often known as beefeaters in later centuries, were already at work. Their duty was both ceremonial and practical. They carried messages from the constable, checked locks, inspected the outer walls, and ensured that every weapon was in its rightful place. Each was a veteran soldier of the king's army, disciplined and trusted. Their red and gold livery would later become a symbol of England itself. But here, in the 15th century, their attire was more functional. Heavy tunics of wool and iron-tipped boots designed to endure the bitter draughts that swept through the fortress. At the same time, within the heart of the tower, the kitchens burst into motion. Cooks, some half awake, kindled fires in the great hearths. Smoke filled the low-beam ceiling as spits were set to turn. The scent of salted meat and baked bread began to drift through the corridors, mingling with the tang of damp stone and river mist. Servants moved like ants through the narrow stairways, carrying buckets of water drawn from the well near the bloody tower, or hauling bundles of rushes to scatter on the floors. The tower may have been royal, but it was not luxurious by modern standards. The chill never quite left the walls, and even the noblest chamber could feel like a cave when the wind came off the river. Midday, the fortress alive. By midday, the tower was fully awake. Bells rang out from the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, calling those within to prayer. The sound was clear, almost serene, but behind it, life was a hum of ordered chaos. Scribes and clerks gathered in small chambers near the White Tower, transcribing records, keeping accounts of the armory, and writing royal decrees under candlelight. The tower was not only a prison, it was also a bureaucratic heart, the keeper of records, weapons, and coin. The mint, operating in one of the outer buildings, was constantly busy. Skilled craftsmen struck silver pennies and gold nobles bearing the face of the king, their rhythmic hammering echoing like a steady heartbeat. Blacksmiths worked in the forges, shaping swords, arrowheads, and armor plates. Sparks flashed against the stone, their fiery glow flickering across the soot-stained faces of men who spent their lives among flame and iron. Each clang of hammer on anvil carried through the courtyards, blending with the calls of merchants who delivered grain, meat, or wine by barge at the wharf. Meanwhile, the royal menagerie near the Lion Tower provided a different kind of noise. Roars, growls, and strange foreign cries. Visitors were both terrified and fascinated by the beasts. Lions and leopards from Africa, a polar bear said to have come as a gift from the King of Norway, even an elephant for a brief, tragic time. The animals were symbols of power and wonder, living trophies that proclaimed England's reach beyond its shores. Outside the animal cages, however, there were other, quieter kinds of captivity. Noble prisoners, accused of treason or rebellion, might spend their afternoons writing letters to the king, praying in the chapel, or pacing the same few steps in their chambers. Many of these rooms still bore marks of their despair, carvings etched into the stone walls, names, dates, prayers, even poems. One could almost imagine the scratching sound of a knife tip, the last act of defiance for a man forgotten. Afternoon, the hidden order of servants. By afternoon, the tower settled into a strange calm. Tasks became more focused, and the hum of activity softened. Servants swept the great halls, replacing rushes with fresh straw, scented with lavender and mint. Pages polished armor and cleaned blades, while washerwomen hung linen to dry near the outer wall, where the breeze from the Thames could catch it. The tower's social world was built on an invisible hierarchy. At the top were the officers, the constable, the lieutenant, the keeper of the keys, each responsible for different aspects of the tower's rule. Beneath them, layers of servants, guards, artisans, and cooks formed a society within a society. Everyone knew their role, their station, and their silence. It was also a world of quiet gossip. Servants knew things their masters did not. They overheard, observed, remembered. A whisper shared over a jug of ale in the kitchens could, in time, reach the ears of a noble or a spy. The tower had a way of making secrets heavy. Even the walls seemed to listen. Evening, the fortress at dusk, as the sun dipped below the Thames. The tower changed again. The river turned bronze and the shadows lengthened across the courtyards. Guards lit torches along the battlements. The soft orange glow flickered against the pale stone, and a cool wind carried the smell of smoke and water. Inside, the kitchens prepared the evening meal. Those of rank dined in chambers by candlelight, while soldiers and servants gathered in lower halls, where laughter and song sometimes replaced the grimness of their work. Jugs of ale passed from hand to hand. Stories of battles fought or ghosts seen were told in low voices. And as the gates were shut for the night, with the great iron bars drawn and the keys locked in the constable's chambers, the tower grew quiet once more. From the battlements, the city of London shimmered in the distance, its fires glowing like a constellation across the dark. But within the tower, the silence was never pure. There were always murmurs, footsteps, whispers from unseen corridors. The tower never slept completely. Even when all seemed still, something always watched. A kingdom within a fortress. To live within the tower was to live in a world apart, enclosed yet alive, dangerous yet ordinary. Every life inside those walls, from the lowest servant to the most exalted noble, was bound together by stone and duty. Some saw it as a privilege to serve the crown so closely, to be at the heart of England's power. Others saw it as a curse, a life spent in shadow, where the air smelled of iron and memory. Either way, the Tower of London in the 1400s was not merely a fortress. It was a mirror of the kingdom itself, its glory and cruelty forever entwined. Section 3. The Prisoners of the Tower, Nobles, Traitors, and the Weight of Silence. The Tower of London in the 1400s was more than a fortress. It was a place of waiting. Behind its gray walls, kings had feasted, soldiers had stood guard, and prisoners had counted the days until freedom or death. For those who were sent here, the tower was never just a prison of stone. It was a prison of the mind. Some left through the Traitor's Gate and were never seen again. Others lingered, sometimes for years, pacing their cells while the echo of their footsteps blended with the creak of ravens outside. The arrival through the Traitor's Gate. For most prisoners, their journey began on the river. The small barge drifted slowly up the Thames, its oars cutting softly through the murky water. The sound of the city faded behind them, the calls of merchants, the laughter of taverns, replaced by the rhythmic splash of water and the growing shadow of the tower. The gate appeared suddenly, dark, arched, and silent. The Traitor's Gate. It was carved directly into the fortress wall, a mouth that swallowed men and did not give them back. Guards waited on the stone steps, halberds glinting in the pale light. As the prisoner stepped ashore, the first sound they heard inside the tower was the clank of chains and the closing of the gate behind them. They were led through winding passages where torches flickered against damp walls to the inner chambers. The air grew heavier with every turn. For some, like noble captives or foreign lords, their confinement meant richly furnished rooms under watch. For others, spies, rebels, and enemies of the crown, it meant the dungeon, a cell deep below ground where no sunlight could reach. The nobles in captivity. In the 1400s, England was in turmoil, the Wars of the Roses. A bitter civil struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York filled the tower with men and women of high birth. Kings themselves walked these corridors as both rulers and prisoners. One of the most haunting stories was that of Henry VI. Once a crowned king, he was brought to the tower after being deposed. His cell, though comfortable by the standards of the age, was still a prison. A small room in the Wakefield Tower, with a narrow slit for light and a simple wooden bed. He spent his final days there in quiet prayer, writing notes of faith. When he died in 1471, under mysterious circumstances, his blood was said to have stained the floor. The mark remained for generations, a dark reminder of the tower's silent cruelty. Then there was Margaret of Anjou, Henry's fierce and intelligent queen. She too was held within these walls for a time, watching her world crumble beyond them. For her, imprisonment was not chains, but the loss of power, a deeper kind of captivity that broke the spirit rather than the body. Even those who escaped execution often carried the tower's mark forever. The Duke of Clarence, brother to King Edward IV, was imprisoned here after a failed rebellion. Legend says he was executed in a barrel of wine, a tale perhaps exaggerated, but one that reflected the strange union of luxury and death that the tower represented. Life in the cells. Life for prisoners depended entirely on who they were and what they were accused of. The tower's cells were a hierarchy unto themselves. High-born prisoners had servants, food, books, and sometimes even music. They could write letters or receive visitors, though always under guard. The walls of their chambers still bear the evidence of their boredom and despair. Carved initials, family crests, prayers for mercy. One carving reads, Jesu, mercy, Mary, help. Another, deeper still, it is nothing without cause. For lesser men, imprisonment was far harsher. The lower dungeons were carved directly from the cold earth beneath the tower. Rats skittered in the corners, water seeped through the walls, and the air was heavy with damp. A prisoner here could not tell day from night. Some went mad within weeks. Food was basic, dark bread, thin broth, perhaps salted meat if one was lucky. Those with money or family could bribe guards for better meals. Others simply endured, counting time by the number of times they heard the guards' boots pass overhead. In rare moments, sunlight crept in through cracks in the ceiling or thin slits in the walls. Prisoners would lift their faces to the light, as if to remember that the world outside still existed. The art of waiting. To live in the tower as a prisoner was to exist between worlds, not yet condemned, but not truly alive. The days stretched endlessly, marked by bells and footsteps. Each sound had meaning. The turning of a key, the clink of armor, the faint cry of a gull from the river. Some prisoners turned inward, finding solace in prayer or reflection. Others wrote poetry or letters to loved ones. One of the most famous, Charles d'Orléans, though from an earlier century, had written verses during his captivity that would become renowned for their melancholy beauty. His words, though French, captured the universal loneliness of imprisonment. I have not seen the rose for so long a time that I think she is dead. There was also fear, constant and suffocating. Every dawn could bring the sound of boots, the command to follow, the walk to the scaffold. Many prisoners did not know if they would live another day. The uncertainty was its own form of torture. But there was another kind of silence in the tower, a respectful, almost sacred quiet among the guards themselves. Many of them, hardened soldiers though they were, felt the weight of their duty. They watched kings and nobles fall, one by one, knowing how fragile power could be. The shadow of execution, when the end came, it often came quietly. The condemned were taken to Tower Hill, just outside the walls, or, for the most highborn, executed within the tower grounds. A priest might walk beside them, murmuring prayers. The condemned often spoke last words that echoed through history. Some faced death calmly, others trembled. The crowd waited in silence, and when the axe fell, the tower stones seemed to absorb the sound. Those who watched learned a simple truth. No one, however great, was beyond the reach of the crown. The tower was not only a prison of walls, but a symbol of royal will, unyielding, absolute, and eternal. Echoes in the stone. After executions, life in the tower continued as before. The gates closed, the guards resumed their watch, and the kitchens filled with the scent of cooking. But the ghosts remained. Men and women who died within its walls were remembered not through monuments, but through the quiet persistence of their stories. Visitors in later centuries would claim to see pale figures walking the battlements at dusk. the ghosts of queens, knights, and martyrs. Whether true or not, the belief itself spoke to something deeper, that the tower remembered. Its stones had absorbed centuries of whispers, footsteps, and final breaths. And in the hush of evening, when the Thames lay still and the ravens called, one could almost hear them, the faint echoes of all who had waited and never left. Section 4. Power and Paranoia. The Tower's royal ceremonies and intrigues. Within the cold grey walls of the Tower of London, the air of the 1400s carried a strange mixture of splendor and fear. It was a place where crowns were placed upon trembling heads, and where those same heads could later fall to the block. The tower was not only a fortress or prison, it was also a royal palace, the center of coronations, political games, and lavish banquets that shimmered with gold, even as the shadow of betrayal lingered in every corner. The tower as a palace of power, before it became synonymous with imprisonment, the tower was a royal home, the beating heart of English sovereignty. Kings stayed here before their coronations, preparing to ascend to the throne beneath its spires. The White Tower, its central keep, gleamed pale in the morning light, a reminder of William the Conqueror's iron will. By the 1400s, the tower had transformed into something grander, a living symbol of monarchy. Its chambers were draped in tapestries of crimson and gold, bearing scenes of battle and biblical grace. Torches flickered against the polished armor of guards, while the banners of the royal house, lion and dragon intertwined, swayed gently in the smoky air. On certain days, the tower became a spectacle of life and ceremony. Trumpets sounded in the courtyards. Horses stamped against the cobblestones. Noblemen arrived in embroidered cloaks, their swords gleaming, their faces hard with purpose. Servants rushed through narrow corridors with silver trays of roasted meats and wine. And above them all, from the battlements, the royal standard fluttered high, signaling to London that the king was in residence. Yet, amid the grandeur, every glance held calculation. Every smile concealed suspicion. The closer one stood to power, the more dangerous the air became. Feasts beneath the shadow of the crown. Inside the tower's great hall, light poured from chandeliers of wrought iron and wax candles. The smell of venison and freshly baked bread mingled with the fragrance of spiced wine. Long tables stretched beneath vaulted ceilings, and courtiers filled the room with laughter that often felt rehearsed. At the head of the table sat the king, whether it was Henry IV, wary and severe, or his son Henry V, bright with confidence and fire. Musicians played lutes and shawms, their melodies weaving through the noise of conversation. But behind every note of music, every cup raised in cheer, there was a quiet awareness that alliances could shift as swiftly as a blade. The Wars of the Roses had not yet fully darkened England, but the seeds of distrust were already planted. Noble families whispered in private alcoves, trading favors and secrets. A misplaced word could mean ruin. Even within the tower, loyalty was not guaranteed. Servants were often spies, guardsmen loyal to whoever might hold power next. The laughter in the great hall could, at any moment, be silenced by a message from the crown, a royal order for arrest, a sentence sealed in wax and death. It was a strange kind of beauty, the glow of candlelight reflecting on polished goblets, the echo of music fading down the corridors, the distant clang of a portcullis closing. In one corner of the tower, the court celebrated life. In another, someone awaited execution. The coronation rituals. Before a new monarch took the throne, the tower played one of its most ancient and sacred roles. The king or queen would spend the night before their coronation within its walls, symbolically claiming their right to rule under divine protection. It was a ritual steeped in centuries of tradition. As dawn approached, the monarch would emerge, clad in royal robes and escorted by nobles and guards. The procession would move slowly across the drawbridge and through the city streets toward Westminster Abbey. Citizens lined the roads, shouting blessings and hopes for prosperity. But within the tower that morning, a quiet anxiety always remained. For every king who departed in triumph, another would return in chains. The tower did not choose sides, it merely observed. One could almost imagine the ancient stones whispering, "I have seen this before." Henry VI had once slept here before his coronation, humble and devout. Years later, he returned, no longer as king, but as prisoner. The symmetry of fate was cruel and precise. The tower welcomed kings, both on their rise and on their fall. Intrigue and betrayal in the corridors. Beneath the public pageantry, a quieter and far more dangerous game was always being played. The 1400s were an age of shifting loyalties, where ambition often outweighed honor. Within the tower's narrow passages, royal messengers delivered sealed letters that could decide a man's life. The words inside might command mercy or demand blood. Courtiers lingered in the shadows, eavesdropping, weaving networks of influence that extended through every corner of the court. There were rumors that certain rooms were used not just for meetings, but for plotting. Guards reported overhearing hushed conversations, fragments of treasonous talk, the soft scrape of parchment being burned. And yet, life in the tower continued with a deceptive calm. Every morning, the bell rang from the chapel. Every evening, the gates were locked. On the surface, all was order and ritual, but beneath, tension thrummed like a string stretched too tight. The tower's music, notes of elegance and fear. Music played an essential role in royal life within the tower. It was not merely for entertainment. It was a statement of authority, culture, and divine grace. During feasts, musicians stood in galleries above the great hall, playing melodies that filled the vaulted air. Harps, viols, recorders, and voices sang praises to God and king alike. The harmonies, though beautiful, carried a strange melancholy. Some chroniclers of the time wrote of how, during certain nights, music echoed faintly through the tower, even when no musicians were present, as if the walls themselves remembered the songs. In reality, These sounds were likely carried by the wind through narrow corridors and stairways. But to those who lived there, it felt as if the tower was alive, singing its own quiet lament for the lives gained and lost within its walls. The banquets that marked a fall, as grand as the tower's feasts were, they sometimes marked the beginning of tragedy. A noble might dine in splendor one evening, only to be accused of treason the next. One such story is whispered from the reign of Edward IV. A banquet had been held to celebrate victory, a night of laughter, rich food, and toasts to loyalty. But among the guests was George, Duke of Clarence. By morning, he was under arrest, accused of plotting against his brother. Within weeks, he was imprisoned in the tower, and soon after, dead. It was as though the tower's feasts were a mirror, reflecting glory on one side, doom on the other. A palace wrapped in shadows. The Tower of London in the 1400s stood as a paradox, a palace of magnificence and menace. Its golden chambers were lined with suspicion. Its courtyards echoed with laughter and whispers alike. The same torches that illuminated royal feasts also lit the way for the condemned. Here, power and paranoia danced together, inseparable. Every victory was shadowed by fear. Every celebration held the taste of uncertainty. The tower's beauty was real. The music, the pageantry, the gleaming armor. But it was the kind of beauty that belonged to a candle's flame, bright, fragile, and destined to flicker out too soon. Section 5. The Hidden Lives of the Tower's Keepers, Guards, Servants, and Shadows Behind the Crown. While kings and queens moved through the Tower of London in glittering robes and guarded grandeur, there existed another world, one that pulsed quietly beneath the royal surface. It was the world of those who kept the tower alive, the guards who patrolled its walls, the servants who cleaned its corridors, the cooks who fed its residents, scribes who recorded its secrets. Their names rarely appeared in chronicles. Their faces were seldom remembered in portraits, yet without them, the mighty fortress would have fallen into silence and ruin. This section pulls back the velvet curtain of royal splendor and reveals the heartbeat of the tower, the countless ordinary souls who lived and labored within its stone embrace during the 1400s. The yeoman warders, the tower's watchful eyes. In the cool dawn before the city stirred, the sound of boots striking the cobblestones echoed through the tower's courtyards. These were the yeoman warders, the men who watched, guarded, and enforced the will of the crown. Dressed in their distinctive Tudor-style uniforms, adorned with the royal insignia, the warders were not merely guards. They were symbols of loyalty and discipline, living embodiments of the king's authority. Long before tourists came to call them beefeaters, they were soldiers chosen for their bravery, veterans of England's wars in France or Scotland. Their duties were relentless. At sunrise, they opened the gates to allow traders and courtiers to enter. At sunset, they performed the ceremony of the keys, a ritual so old and so precise that it continues to this very day. Every night, with lantern in hand and key held aloft, the chief warder would lock the main gates of the fortress, while guards answered the ritual challenge, "Who goes there?" with the words, "The keys." It was not mere ceremony. In the 1400s, security was a matter of survival. The tower held not just treasure and royal regalia, but prisoners, sometimes nobles, sometimes foreign spies, and occasionally even kings. The warders had to remain vigilant, for an unlocked gate or a moment's inattention could bring disaster. Yet, despite their authority, the warders were still human. They lived with their families in small stone lodgings near the inner wall. They tended small gardens, shared food with one another, and told tales by firelight. Stories of haunted corridors and the ghosts of those who had never left the tower. Servants of the crown, the invisible hands below the grandeur of the royal apartments. Narrow stairways led to kitchens and cellars, where the true work of the tower was done. The servants, cooks, cleaners, washerwomen, and errand boys moved like quiet currents through the fortress, unseen but essential. In the great kitchens, smoke curled upward in thick, fragrant clouds. The smell of roasting meats, fresh bread, and spiced stews filled the air. Men stirred enormous iron cauldrons with wooden paddles taller than themselves, while women rolled dough or plucked birds by the dozen. The kitchen fires never slept. Yet the kitchens were more than a workplace. They were a whispering hub of information. Servants overheard everything. Noble arguments, confessions, even the occasional plotting. They traded stories among themselves, building a hidden record of life in the tower that no chronicler ever wrote down. Not all tasks were so lively. Some servants tended the cold, lonely corners of the tower, cleaning abandoned chambers or delivering meals to prisoners. Imagine the eerie quiet of carrying a tray of bread and water through a damp passageway, only to hear the faint echo of chains behind a door. Life was not easy for them. Pay was small, punishment was harsh, and loyalty was demanded without question. Yet many stayed for years, bound to the tower by familiarity, duty, or the simple certainty that outside its walls, life might be even harder. The tower's artisans and smiths. The Tower of London was also a working fortress, and behind its beauty lay a network of workshops, forges, and armories. The clang of hammer against anvil rang out daily from the lower courtyards, where blacksmiths and armorers shaped the tools of war and justice alike. Some forged swords and helmets for royal soldiers, while others crafted locks, keys, and chains for the tower's many doors and for its prisoners. The irony was not lost on them. The same hands that built the crown's defense also built the instruments of its cruelty. Their work required precision and secrecy. The royal armorer was a figure of great trust, for he had access to the tower's stores of iron and steel, materials too valuable to be wasted or stolen. Apprentices learned the craft under strict supervision, their hands blistered, but their minds sharpened by years of discipline. There was also the Royal Mint, which for centuries operated within the tower's walls. Skilled moneyers struck coins bearing the king's image, ensuring that the lifeblood of England's economy flowed securely under watchful eyes. Each clink of metal was not just an act of trade, it was a declaration of authority, stamped in silver and gold. Women in the tower, strength in shadows. Though their names rarely survive, women were ever present in the tower's daily rhythm. They were cooks, seamstresses, laundresses, nurses, and even jailers' wives. Some accompanied their husbands. Others were born within the tower's shadow and never left it. Their lives were often marked by quiet resilience. They cared for children in tiny apartments, washed the blood-stained clothes of prisoners, and lit candles in the chapel for souls both noble and forgotten. During sieges or outbreaks of plague, they remained steadfast, tending the sick, sharing what little food remained, and comforting those awaiting execution. In letters and diaries from the period, hints of their presence appear like ghosts. A note about the good wife who kept her bread warm for the condemned, or the lady who wept at the chapel window. Even amid fear and cruelty, compassion found its place. The sounds of everyday life. If one could stand in the courtyard of the tower around the year 1450, close your eyes and listen, you would hear a symphony of daily life. The rhythmic pounding of the blacksmith's hammer, the low murmur of voices in the kitchens, the clip-clop of hooves from messengers arriving with news from the king's court, and above it all, the bells of St. Peter ad Vincula, the tower's chapel, ringing for mass or morning. These sounds wove together into a kind of living heartbeat, one that gave the fortress its soul. For the tower was not just a place of royal power or imprisonment. It was a village unto itself, complete, self-sustaining, and always awake, unseen and unsung. For all their service, the ordinary people of the tower were rarely remembered. When kings were crowned or traitors executed, chroniclers wrote of noble deeds and royal proclamations. But the hands that cooked the feasts, swept the floors, and carried the torches through the night went unrecorded. And yet, these were the people who made the tower what it was, a living, breathing organism, pulsing with work, duty, and endurance. Their legacy lingers not in words, but in the worn stones of the stairways, the grooves in the doorways polished by their passing hands, and the echo of footsteps that still seem to wander through the tower's narrow halls. Section 6. The tower's darkest secrets, prisoners, torture, and the whispers of the condemned. The Tower of London, with its thick stone walls and solemn turrets, was built to project royal power. Yet for many centuries, it also served a darker purpose, a place where ambition met its end, where whispers of treason echoed off cold walls, and where hope often faded before the dawn. In the 1400s, the tower became not just a fortress or royal residence, but a stage for the most dramatic and tragic moments of England's turbulent political life. Behind its massive gates, the tower concealed stories of betrayal, suffering, and the indomitable human will to survive. This was the tower's other identity, not as a palace, but as a prison for the powerful. The descent through the gate of death for those accused of crimes against the crown. The first step into the tower was through the Traitor's Gate, an entrance that still bears its chilling name. Accessible from the River Thames, prisoners were rowed silently beneath its arch, the water rippling with the reflection of their last glimpse of freedom. Many of these captives were not common criminals. They were nobles, knights, scholars, and even queens. individuals whose only crime was standing on the wrong side of history. The arrival was ritualistic. Guards would escort the prisoner up the slippery stone stairs, their chains clinking softly, echoing through the damp corridor. Some prisoners arrived defiant, heads held high. Others trembled, unable to believe that the tower, a symbol of royal protection, had turned into their cage. Once inside, they were shown to their chambers. The wealthy might have a furnished cell, complete with a bed, a writing desk, and even servants. The poor, or those fallen from grace, were left in cold, dark rooms with straw for bedding and little light to mark the passage of day. It was said that once you entered through the Traitor's Gate, the tower itself decided whether you would ever leave again. The noble prisoners of 1400s were an age of ceaseless power struggles. Kings rose and fell with dizzying speed, and the tower became the place where their enemies, or former friends, were confined. Among the most famous was Henry VI, who, after being deposed during the Wars of the Roses, was imprisoned in the tower's Wakefield Tower. Once an anointed king, Henry was reduced to a lonely captive, his only companions the monks who visited him for prayer. His cell, though comfortable by the standards of the time, could not save him from despair. On a cold May night in 1471, Henry was found dead, of melancholy, the official record claimed, though few doubted the truth. He had been quietly murdered to end the threat of his return. The tower had claimed yet another royal life. Other noble prisoners followed. George, Duke of Clarence, brother to Edward IV, was held in the tower after being accused of treason. His end became legend. He was executed privately, supposedly drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine. Whether true or not, the tale reflected the grim blend of drama and ritual that surrounded the tower's executions. For nobles, the tower was both a purgatory and a theater of final acts. Behind its walls, alliances were broken, confessions wrung, and fates sealed. The instruments of persuasion. While the tower was not primarily a torture chamber, it was home to some of England's most infamous instruments of pain. The rack, the scavenger's daughter, and the manacles were kept in the tower's lower chambers, used sparingly but with devastating effect. The rack, a long wooden frame with rollers at each end, was designed to stretch the body until joints dislocated and muscles tore. Victims were bound by the wrists and ankles, and as the handle turned, agony followed. The scavenger's daughter, by contrast, crushed rather than stretched. It forced the body into a position of extreme compression, bringing knees to chest and head to knees, the metal frame tightening until the prisoner could hardly breathe. Yet, the tower's use of torture was strategic rather than sadistic. It was rarely done for pleasure. Rather, it was an art of persuasion, reserved for extracting confessions from those accused of treason or conspiracy. Prisoners often emerged from the dungeons, physically broken, but spiritually unbowed. Some recanted, others refused to yield, and in their stubborn silence, they became symbols of courage that outlasted their captors. Whispers in the stone. For centuries, it was said that the tower remembered everything, that its walls absorbed the cries and prayers of the condemned. Even today, if one walks its corridors in the quiet of dawn, one might feel that lingering presence. Chroniclers of the 1400s recorded eerie stories from the guards who patrolled its halls. Some claimed to hear soft sobbing in the Beauchamp Tower, where many prisoners carved their names and family crests into the stone. Others spoke of ghostly figures drifting through the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, the final resting place of many who met their end on Tower Green. One of the most famous inscriptions, still visible today, reads, "As the sparrow alone upon the housetop, so the captive mourneth." The words were etched by a prisoner named Philip Howard centuries later, yet the sentiment speaks for all who came before him. These carvings were acts of resistance, quiet, wordless declarations that, though their bodies were caged, their spirits would endure. The last walk, from the tower to the scaffold. Not all who entered the tower died within its walls. Some were led out, but only to meet their end on the green beyond. Executions within the tower were reserved for the most notable of prisoners, nobles, queens, and traders of royal blood. The condemned would be escorted to Tower Green, where a small crowd, often of peers and clergy, gathered in solemn silence. A block of oak awaited them. The executioner's axe, freshly honed, gleamed in the weak morning light. In those moments, many prisoners displayed extraordinary composure. They would deliver brief speeches, affirming their faith, asking for mercy, or expressing forgiveness before kneeling. The executioner would wait for their signal, and then, in one swift stroke, history would change forever. Blood was quickly covered with straw, prayers were murmured, and life in the tower moved on. To live in the tower was to exist in a place where life and death coexisted uneasily, where laughter in the kitchens might be followed by screams from the dungeons, and where every echo could carry a memory. The dual nature of the tower. Even amid its darkness, the tower was not purely a place of despair. For some, imprisonment there was a mark of honor, proof that one had played a role in history grand enough to threaten a king. For others, it was purgatory, a test of endurance that revealed character under the weight of fear. The Tower of London in the 1400s was a paradox, a fortress and a prison, a palace and a tomb. It was a mirror of the times, ruthless, majestic, and utterly human. Within its walls, the destinies of kings and commoners alike were decided, their stories intertwined with the chill of the Thames and the echo of footsteps fading into silence. Section 7. The Ritual of Death, Executions, Honor, and the Crowd Beyond the Tower. The 1400s in England were a century of turbulence, a time when crowns were traded like coins and loyalty could change with the wind. The Tower of London stood at the heart of these shifting allegiances, not merely as a fortress or prison, but as a solemn stage upon which death itself was given ceremony. In this section, we step into the ritual of execution, an event that mingled tragedy and spectacle, silence and thunder, sorrow and power. Because in the 15th century, to die by the axe at the Tower was not merely a punishment. It was a performance written by fate, witnessed by both the living and the dead. The morning of execution, dawn over the tower, was always cold, even in summer. The thick river mist would roll in from the Thames, curling around the white tower like a shroud. In the early hours, when the city still slept, the condemned would be awakened by the tolling of the chapel bell. A priest would come, often in silence, carrying the sacraments. Together they would pray in the dim light of the cell, the prisoner's trembling voice mingling with the Latin murmurs of absolution. There was always a sense of stillness before the storm, as though the tower itself held its breath. The prisoner, if noble, was permitted small mercies, a final meal, the writing of a letter, perhaps a few quiet words to a trusted servant. Some took wine to calm their nerves. Others refused, wanting to meet death with a clear mind. As the guards arrived, armor clinking in the half-light, the final walk began. It was short, yet eternal. Down narrow stairways, through cold passages, and finally out into the open air, the sunlight often blinding after weeks or months in the dim prison chambers. The crowd would already be gathering beyond the tower walls. Word spread quickly in London whenever a great person was to die. Merchants left their stalls, apprentices climbed onto rooftops, and women carried their children to witness the moment history would turn. Tower Green, the stage of silence. For the most high-born prisoners, execution did not take place on Tower Hill before the masses, but on Tower Green, within the fortress walls, hidden from the public eye. This was both a mercy and a privilege. The Queen, the Duke, the Lord, they would die in private before a small assembly of peers, priests, and royal officers. The scaffold would be simple, a platform draped in black cloth, with a low wooden block at its center and a straw mat laid to catch the blood. The executioner stood beside it, axe in hand, his face concealed beneath a hood or cowl. Nearby, the priest waited to receive the condemned's final confession. There was a deep, ceremonial order to it all, a kind of choreography between power and submission. The prisoner would kneel, offer a few words of repentance or loyalty to the king, and then remove any outer garments. It was not uncommon for nobles to forgive their executioner, even thanking him for a swift and clean stroke. One such act of grace was performed by Margaret of Salisbury, who, though not of the 1400s, embodies the spirit of those times. She refused to kneel, crying, "So should traitors do." "And I am none," before the executioner was forced to chase her around the scaffold. Even in death, defiance lived within the tower's shadow. The axe and the moment between breaths. When the executioner raised his axe, the world seemed to pause. Even the crows circling the battlements grew silent. The condemned would whisper a prayer, or sometimes a single name. Then, in one clean practiced motion, the axe fell. If the executioner was skilled, death was instant. If not, it could take 2 or 3 blows, a gruesome failure that haunted all who witnessed it. Records from the 1400s tell of such moments, when the crowd gasped, the priest looked away, and the executioner, trembling, was forced to finish his grim work. After the stroke, the head was held up for all to see, the traditional words echoing across the courtyard. "Behold the head of a traitor." Yet, in truth, most who died upon Tower Green were not traitors. They were victims of politics, of shifting loyalties, of royal paranoia. Their blood fed not justice, but the hunger for control that defined medieval power. Tower Hill, the people's spectacle. While Tower Green was reserved for nobles, Tower Hill, just outside the fortress walls, was the public theater of death. Here the executions were grand affairs, drawing thousands. Crowds gathered as early as dawn, the air thick with chatter and the smell of roasted chestnuts and ale. Hawkers sold pamphlets describing the condemned's crimes, though many in the crowd came not for justice, but for the drama, the chance to see a great man fall. The scaffold on Tower Hill was higher and broader, built to be seen from afar. The condemned would be brought forth under heavy guard, often in a cart, to the sound of jeers or murmurs of sympathy, depending on their reputation. Some faced the crowd with dignity, delivering speeches that echoed through history. One nobleman, before laying his head upon the block, said calmly, "Pray for me, for I die the king's good servant, though not his perfect one." When the axe fell, a roar swept through the masses, sometimes in approval, sometimes in horror. Afterward, the body was often displayed on London Bridge or city gates as a grim warning. Heads, tarred to prevent decay, stared down at passers-by like macabre guardians of royal authority. Death as propaganda. Execution in the 1400s was not only punishment, it was political theater. Every stroke of the axe, every drop of blood spilled on Tower Green sent a message to the kingdom. For the monarchy, it demonstrated control, a visible reminder that even the mightiest could fall if they opposed the crown. For the people, it was both terrifying and reassuring. Justice, however harsh, was being done. But for those who lived in the tower, the guards, the priests, the cooks, each execution left an invisible scar. The sound of the axe, the silence that followed, and the tolling of the chapel bell became part of daily life. Some grew numb to it, others whispered prayers in secret for the souls of the dead, echoes of mercy. Despite its grim reputation, the tower also witnessed rare acts of compassion. Occasionally, sentences were commuted, or prisoners were pardoned at the last moment. There were cases where an unexpected messenger arrived, a royal seal in hand, halting the execution even as the condemned knelt before the block. The crowd would gasp, the prisoner would faint with disbelief, and the tower would, for a brief moment, breathe life instead of death. One chronicler wrote of a man spared in such a way. He rose from the shadow of death as one reborn, but he left part of his soul behind him in the tower. It was true. No one who faced the tower's scaffold ever left unchanged. The quiet after the fall. After every execution, the tower fell silent again. Guards swept the bloodied straw into the Thames, and the executioner's axe was wiped clean and stored away. The condemned's body was either buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, or, if disgraced, taken elsewhere for display. Only the faint scent of iron in the air, the hush of the river, and the heavy feeling in the heart reminded those left behind of what had occurred. By nightfall, new prisoners might already be arriving through the Traitor's Gate. The cycle of power, fear, and fate continued, unbroken, unrelenting, and ever watchful beneath the tower's stone gaze. Section 8. The keepers of the tower, guards, servants, and the shadows of duty. Inside the thick, echoing walls of the Tower of London in the 1400s, not all who lived there were prisoners or kings. Many were simply the silent watchers, the keepers, the servants, and the soldiers whose lives were woven into the tower's daily rhythm of power and punishment. They stood between the crown and the condemned, living their lives in a world where fear, loyalty, and secrecy mixed like the morning fog drifting from the Thames. Theirs was a life of quiet endurance, not celebrated, not condemned, but essential. They were the unseen pulse of the tower, the yeoman warders, guardians of the crown. The most recognizable figures were the yeoman warders, known today as the beefeaters. In the 1400s, however, they were not symbols of tradition, but men of purpose, elite soldiers of the royal household, chosen for their loyalty and skill in battle. They stood guard at the gates, patrolled the walls at night, and held the keys to every cell. When the great oak doors closed with a heavy thud, it was the yeomen who ensured they stayed that way. Their duties were grueling. Each dawn began with a formal inspection. Locks were checked, prisoners counted, orders reviewed. The most important part of their job was maintaining discipline. The tower was not just a prison, it was a labyrinth of secrets, and leaks could mean death. A careless word, a bribe accepted, or a glance at the wrong parchment could end a career or a life. But beyond duty, there was dignity. Being a warder meant proximity to royalty, and that held prestige. They often dined in the same halls where nobles had feasted centuries before. Yet even in those moments, the shadows of the tower loomed, for the same stones that guarded kings also whispered the cries of those they condemned. The prison guards and the weight of compassion. Below the yeomen were the prison guards, ordinary men assigned to watch over prisoners, from noble traitors to foreign spies. Their lives were marked by contradiction. On one hand, they were expected to show absolute obedience to the crown. On the other, they often grew close to their captives, especially those held for long periods. Some prisoners, confined for months or years, developed unexpected friendships with their keepers. They shared stories, food, and moments of quiet humanity amid the coldness of captivity. There are records of guards who secretly passed letters, smuggled small comforts, or allowed prisoners to glimpse the river through a narrow slit of light. Others were less kind, known for their cruelty, taking bribes to ease a sentence or hasten a death. The guards' quarters were simple, bare wooden furniture, straw beds, and flickering torches that filled the narrow halls with smoke. Their pay was modest, often supplemented by gifts or coins from the wealthy families of prisoners. And yet, they lived in constant tension. The same keys that locked a cell could, with a change of fortune, one day turn against them, because in the tower, loyalty was fragile. Many a guard who once watched the condemned later found himself behind the same iron door. The servants of the tower, silent hands of history. Then there were the servants, cooks, cleaners, stable hands, and errand boys who kept the tower running. They worked in the background, their faces unnoticed, their stories rarely told. In the kitchens, the air was thick with smoke and the scent of roasting meat. Food was prepared not only for the garrison, but also for prisoners of rank, who were often allowed their own servants and meals according to their status. Cooking for a traitor and a king in the same day was not uncommon. The servants saw everything. They heard the whispers between guards, the secret weeping of prisoners, and the muttered orders of officials. Yet they spoke little. Silence was their armor. To survive in the tower was to know when not to know. At night, the servants moved through the darkened halls, carrying candles through corridors lined with tapestries and iron doors. Some claimed they could feel the cold presence of those who had died there. Even in the 1400s, the tower was said to be haunted, its silence alive with murmurs of the past. The executioner and his lonely craft, no figure in the tower's hierarchy, carried a burden as heavy as the executioner. He was both feared and necessary, the king's final instrument of justice. In the 1400s, executioners were rarely glamorous figures. They lived on the edge of society, respected for their skill but shunned for their profession. Within the tower, they held a unique position. They were trusted to end lives swiftly and cleanly, yet distrusted for what that task required. A skilled executioner could make the difference between a dignified death and a public horror. They trained their arms for years, learning the weight, angle, and momentum of the axe. Each stroke had to be perfect, for one mistake could unleash chaos among the watching crowds. Some executioners left personal marks on their axes, carved initials, charms, or small crosses meant to ward off the souls of those they killed. After a beheading, they often prayed for forgiveness, alone in the stillness of the tower chapel. And yet, despite the blood on their hands, many saw themselves not as murderers, but as servants of order. One chronicler wrote of a tower executioner who, after a long career, wept as he retired, saying, "I have slain the wicked and the blameless alike, and both haunt my dreams. The tower's families and the life beyond the walls. For all its darkness, the tower was also home to families. The yeoman warders lived there with their wives and children, raising them among the stone courtyards and echoing chambers. Children played where prisoners once walked, chasing each other across the green where kings had died. At night, their laughter would fade beneath the heavy ring of the closing gates, replaced by the distant rumble of the river and the creak of the drawbridge. Daily life was a balance between ordinary and extraordinary. A mother might hang laundry beneath the shadow of the White Tower, while her husband guarded a prisoner accused of treason. Births, weddings, and deaths all happened within those same walls, creating a strange, enclosed world, part village, part fortress, part graveyard. For the families who lived there, the tower was not a symbol of fear. It was home, whispers, and watchfulness. Life inside the tower was built on secrecy. The walls had ears. The stones seemed to remember every word. Servants learned to speak softly. Guards kept their thoughts to themselves, and even laughter could seem dangerous in the wrong place. Those who lived there long enough became part of the tower's rhythm. They sensed when danger was coming, when a new prisoner would arrive, when a royal order would change a man's fate, when the river grew restless beneath the gate. And always the presence of death lingered, not as horror, but as familiarity. The people of the tower learned to live beside it, to breathe the same air as ghosts, and to sleep peacefully under the same roof where others had met their end. A fortress alive with humanity. The Tower of London in the 1400s was not merely a place of stone and chains. It was alive with footsteps, voices, laughter, prayers, and the steady rhythm of human endurance. For every royal prisoner, there were 100 ordinary souls keeping the tower's heart beating. Men and women who lived in the shadow of power, yet found meaning in their small acts of service. They are mostly forgotten by history, their names lost to time. But in the echo of their footsteps, in the faint warmth left by a candle flame on cold stone, their presence still lingers, because without them, the tower could not have endured. Section 9. Secret Messages and Hidden Lives. Prisoners' Last Words. While the Tower of London was a fortress of stone and iron, its walls held far more than the weight of royalty and prisoners. They held whispers, scratches, and silent cries, hidden traces of those who lived, suffered, and sometimes resisted behind the imposing doors. The walls were a canvas, and the prisoners, whether noble or lowly, used whatever means they could find to leave a mark of their existence. In the 1400s, being imprisoned in the tower was not merely a test of patience, it was a test of spirit. Those confined knew that the physical walls were only part of the ordeal. The real struggle was maintaining humanity amid isolation, fear, and uncertainty. Many turned to secret writing, carving, or smuggling notes as a means of asserting their presence in a world that sought to erase them. Carvings, silent echoes on stone. Perhaps the most tangible evidence of these hidden lives were the carvings on cell walls. Prisoners often etched their names, dates, prayers, or small symbols into the stone. Some scratched hearts, crosses, or enigmatic patterns, while others left more detailed images, faces, animals, or even tiny depictions of the tower itself. These carvings were acts of defiance. Each mark was a silent claim, I was here, and I endured. They also served as a private companion in solitude, a way to occupy the mind when days stretched endlessly and food was meager. Some prisoners, particularly those awaiting execution, might carve a final message or a prayer for forgiveness. These inscriptions, though small and hidden, became a personal archive of despair, hope, and resilience. Archaeologists today have discovered carvings dating back centuries, some barely visible beneath layers of grime. They reveal a profound human need to leave evidence of existence, even when life seemed destined to vanish without a trace. Messages in the margins, notes and letters. In addition to carvings, some prisoners attempted to communicate with the outside world. Noble captives who were often allowed writing materials secretly passed notes to visiting servants, guards, or sympathetic allies. These messages ranged from pleas for mercy to simple reminders of loyalty and love. One of the most remarkable aspects of these secret writings was the ingenious methods of concealment. Messages were hidden inside folded pages of books, beneath wooden planks, or even in the seams of clothing. In some cases, Letters were passed under doors or through the small windows of the tower, often at great personal risk. Discovery of such a note could result in punishment, but the risk was worth the chance of connection, a lifeline to a world beyond stone walls. The content of these messages was varied. Some expressed desperation, while others were almost mundane. Reminders of family, instructions regarding estates, or small sketches of the prisoner's surroundings. These writings humanized the confined, showing that even under extreme duress, they sought to maintain relationships, routines, and a sense of normalcy. The role of poetry and prayer. Prisoners also turned inward, finding solace in poetry, prayer, and meditative writing. Poems carved into stone or written on scraps of parchment reflected both personal anguish and universal truths about human suffering. Religious prayers were common, often invoking protection, guidance, or forgiveness. These rituals of writing were more than spiritual, they were psychological. In a place where freedom was stripped away, the act of expressing thoughts and emotions provided a measure of control. It reminded prisoners that their minds could remain free even when their bodies were confined. Some wrote philosophical reflections, questioning justice, mortality, and the nature of power. Others recorded mundane details of daily life, the arrival of meals, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the changing light of the day. These observations served as markers of time, grounding them in a reality that might otherwise have dissolved into fear and despair. Symbols of defiance and secret codes in the tower. Communication could also be a coded language. Prisoners developed subtle symbols and shorthand to convey messages without revealing meaning to guards or other inmates. Crosses might indicate hope, while dots and lines could represent dates or planned escape attempts. Some messages were almost like modern graffiti, boldly declaring presence and intent. Even simple scratches or marks could carry layers of meaning, the signature, a sentiment, a warning. These coded messages transformed the walls into a living network of information, invisible to the casual observer, but vibrant to those who understood. In some cases, these codes were passed down. Guards or fellow prisoners might recognize certain markings, carrying the messages forward or hiding them for posterity. The tower thus became not just a prison, but a secret archive of human thought and defiance, preserving voices that might otherwise have vanished completely. Prisoners' psychology, the need to be remembered. Why did prisoners go to such lengths? Part of the answer lies in psychology. Being confined, stripped of freedom and dignity, creates a profound fear of erasure. Carvings, writings, and hidden notes are acts of resistance, a way of asserting identity and ensuring memory. In the 1400s, where execution could be swift and records incomplete, leaving a trace was almost a spiritual act. It was a way of communicating to future generations, even as the current ones could not intervene. Prisoners were acutely aware of the fleeting nature of life, and their markings were small efforts to achieve immortality in stone and ink. Historians suggest that these acts of marking walls or passing notes also had a therapeutic function. Writing or carving focused the mind, provided a sense of accomplishment, and maintained a sense of agency in an environment designed to strip it away. The tower's lasting legacy. The secret writings of prisoners are among the most evocative artifacts of medieval life. They provide a rare window into the thoughts and emotions of people who were often silenced in official records. Through their carvings, notes, and prayers, we hear whispers of courage, despair, and humanity that transcend the centuries. The Tower of London remains a powerful symbol, not only of power and punishment, but also of human resilience. Each mark etched into stone, each smuggled note, and each silent prayer is a testament to the enduring spirit of those confined. It reminds us that even in the darkest places, people seek connection, expression, and remembrance. When historians study the tower, they often focus on kings, queens, and political intrigue. Yet the true story is also told in these small, secret traces, evidence that life, hope, and humanity persist even amid isolation and fear. In the 1400s, the walls of the tower were not just barriers. They were a canvas for the human spirit, capturing the intimate and secret stories of those who lived, suffered, and dreamed behind them. Section 10. Famous prisoners and their lives inside the tower. The Tower of London was far more than a fortress or a royal residence. It was a stage for some of the most dramatic human stories in history. In the 1400s, it held prisoners of all ranks, from nobles accused of treason to foreigners caught in political webs, and even ordinary people ensnared by circumstance. Each cell had its own narrative. Each wall bore witness to suffering, intrigue, or quiet endurance. Royal prisoners, from power to confinement. One of the tower's defining characteristics was its use as a royal prison. Members of the nobility or royal family could find themselves suddenly stripped of privilege, confined within cold stone walls where luxuries were scarce and danger ever present. Princes and princesses often faced a precarious existence. Their rank offered certain protections, but also made them targets for manipulation and political games. For instance, the young princes Edward V and his brother Richard of Shrewsbury, famously known as the Princes in the Tower, were lodged in the tower under the protection or suspicion of their uncle, Richard III. Their lives inside the tower were shrouded in secrecy, with rumors of mistreatment and mysterious disappearances. The conditions for such royal prisoners were paradoxical. They had attendants and some comforts, yet they were never truly free, constantly under watch and surrounded by political tension. Even noble prisoners often struggled with boredom, anxiety, and uncertainty. They spent hours pacing, reading whatever materials were available, or attempting to correspond with allies. The psychological strain of such confinement was immense. In many cases, prisoners attempted to influence their fate through petitions, gifts, or clandestine letters, hoping that someone outside would intervene on their behalf. Political prisoners, treason, and survival. Beyond royalty, the tower held countless political prisoners, accused of treason, rebellion, or conspiracies. The 1400s were a period of instability in England, with constant shifts in power and frequent uprisings. Those who fell out of favor could be imprisoned at the tower as a first step toward negotiation, execution, or exile. One famous political detainee was Sir Thomas More's predecessor figures, who were often confined for their opposition to ruling monarchs. Political prisoners faced harsher conditions than royalty. Cells were smaller, food less plentiful, and guards less sympathetic. They had to carefully navigate the dangers of intrigue, both inside and outside their cell. Alliances with guards or other prisoners could mean the difference between survival and death. These prisoners often documented their experiences in letters or diaries. They wrote of the monotony of days, the anxiety of waiting for judgment, and the camaraderie or rivalry with fellow inmates. Their accounts reveal that life inside the tower was not just a punishment of the body, but a relentless test of mental endurance. The tower as a psychological battleground for many. The tower became a psychological battlefield. Prisoners contended not only with physical discomfort, but also with isolation, fear, and uncertainty. Some experienced hallucinations or paranoia, particularly those confined in solitary cells. Others developed coping mechanisms, such as keeping detailed journals, carving symbols on the walls, or memorizing stories and prayers to pass the time. Famous prisoners like John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, relied on religious devotion to endure captivity. His days were filled with prayer, study, and spiritual reflection, using the rhythm of devotion to impose order on the chaos of confinement. These routines were critical for maintaining a sense of self and purpose, allowing prisoners to retain dignity in circumstances designed to diminish it. Even small comforts, such as letters from family or visitors allowed by royal permission, could sustain hope. The psychological dimension of imprisonment was as significant as the physical. Those who retained mental resilience often fared better, while despair could hasten illness or even death. Daily life inside, food, guards, and rituals. Life in the tower followed a peculiar rhythm. Guards ensured that prisoners were watched constantly, yet the level of vigilance varied depending on the prisoner's status. Royal or noble prisoners might have attendants, while ordinary political prisoners often had to rely on guards for basic provisions. Meals were simple: bread, broth, and occasional meat or fish, delivered by warders or family members who bribed their way in. Sleep, too, was a luxury. Cells were often cold and damp, with little ventilation. Prisoners improvised bedding and clothing to cope with harsh conditions. Despite the discomfort, many tried to maintain personal rituals, reading, writing, or performing religious practices to retain a sense of normalcy. Communication was another challenge. Many prisoners relied on secret channels, sympathetic guards, disguised letters, or coded messages carved into walls. Some prisoners used poetry, puzzles, or philosophical writings to express themselves and leave a trace for posterity. These forms of expression reveal a remarkable creativity and resilience, even under severe restrictions. Notable figures and their experiences. The tower housed numerous notable individuals in the 1400s. Figures such as Earl of Warwick, often called the Kingmaker, experienced imprisonment as a consequence of political shifts. Others, like Margaret of Anjou, queen consort to Henry VI, found themselves confined for weeks or months during times of rebellion. Each story was unique, but the underlying themes of uncertainty, fear, and resilience were constant. These prisoners left records, both physical and written, that provide a rare insight into medieval life. Through letters, carvings, and later accounts, we learn how they coped with fear, maintained hope, and sometimes even plotted escapes or political maneuvers. The tower was not only a place of punishment, but also a crucible that tested wit, endurance, and ingenuity. Legacy of the Tower's Prisoners. The stories of the Tower's prisoners endure, not because of grand battles or royal decrees, but because of the human experiences captured within its walls. These individuals, whether kings, nobles, or political opponents, provide a window into the medieval psyche, revealing how people confronted confinement, danger, and uncertainty. Their experiences remind us that history is not only about events, but also about the lived experiences of those caught in extraordinary circumstances. The Tower of London, with its stark stone walls and hidden chambers, remains a testament to human resilience, creativity, and the enduring will to survive, even when faced with the gravest of threats. The tales of these prisoners teach us that survival is not merely a matter of physical endurance. It is also a matter of maintaining hope, finding meaning, and asserting one's identity in the face of forces beyond control. In every carved initial, hidden note, and whispered prayer, the Tower of London preserves the quiet, powerful testament of those who endured, offering lessons that transcend centuries. Section 11. Life of the Guards and their interactions with prisoners. While the Tower of London is often remembered for the prisoners it held, the lives of those who guarded these captives were equally fascinating and often overlooked. The guards of the 1400s were tasked with a delicate balance, enforcing confinement, protecting the tower, and navigating the complex social hierarchies of the prisoners they oversaw. Their daily lives were demanding, dangerous, and sometimes surprisingly personal, offering a window into the intricate human ecosystem of the tower. Daily duties of the Tower Guards. The tower's guards were a mix of soldiers, watchmen, and attendants, all trained to maintain vigilance over one of England's most infamous prisons. Shifts were long and monotonous, with guards patrolling corridors, manning gates, and checking cells. They were responsible not only for preventing escapes, but also for ensuring prisoners received whatever privileges or allowances were granted according to their rank. A noble prisoner might have attendants delivering meals or reading materials, and the guards needed to facilitate these interactions. Meanwhile, ordinary prisoners often depended entirely on guards for basic necessities such as water, bread, and firewood. The guards' behavior could profoundly affect a prisoner's experience, turning hardship into manageable discomfort, or, in some cases, making conditions almost unbearable. Guards often had to document the prisoner's movements and activities, especially for high-profile captives. Daily logs would note any correspondence, visitors, or unusual behavior. These records served both to maintain order and to provide the monarchy with intelligence, allowing rulers to monitor the morale, alliances, and intentions of those confined. Interactions with prisoners, power and negotiation. The relationship between guards and prisoners was never simply one of authority and obedience. It was a dynamic of power, negotiation, and occasional mutual respect. High-ranking prisoners sometimes bribed guards to provide additional comforts, like extra food or more privacy. In return, guards could wield significant influence over their daily conditions. For political prisoners, such interactions could be a lifeline. Guards who sympathized with their plight might discreetly pass letters, allow more time outside the cell, or offer information about court developments. Conversely, a guard motivated by corruption or malice could make life extremely difficult, withholding necessities or imposing stricter restrictions than official orders required. Historical accounts reveal instances where friendships developed between guards and prisoners, especially when guards admired a prisoner's courage or intellect. In some cases, guards acted as intermediaries, helping to arrange secret communications with allies or family members. These personal connections were subtle yet powerful, influencing the psychological experience of imprisonment more than the stone walls themselves. Guard life beyond the walls. Life for a tower guard extended far beyond their daily watch. Guards lived within or near the tower complex, often forming a small community with their families. Their work was respected but also stressful, as failing in their duties could carry severe consequences. Accusations of negligence or corruption could lead to demotion, imprisonment, or even execution, particularly when guarding high-profile political prisoners. The guards also had ceremonial duties, participating in royal pageantry, executions, and inspections. These tasks required discipline and precision, and often placed guards in direct contact with both royalty and prisoners in highly charged situations. Their lives blended the mundane, patrolling, cleaning, and attending to prisoners, with the extraordinary, such as witnessing high-stakes political drama unfold within the tower walls. Despite their responsibilities, guards sometimes had moments of levity. They exchanged stories, jokes, and gossip, often reflecting on the absurdities and contradictions of medieval politics. In this way, the tower became not only a place of confinement for prisoners, but also a vivid, living community for those who defended its gates. Challenges and risks. Being a tower guard was not without danger. Prisoners, especially nobles and political figures, could be desperate and resourceful, attempting to escape or manipulate guards. Guards also faced external threats, such as attacks on the tower or political unrest spilling into the surrounding city. Illness and poor living conditions were another risk. Guards often lived in crowded quarters with limited sanitation, making the spread of disease a constant concern. Seasonal changes brought additional challenges. Freezing winters made patrols physically taxing, while hot summers made heavy armor and long hours unbearable. Despite these hardships, the position could be prestigious. Service at the tower often conferred social standing and connections that could lead to advancement in military or civic careers. Some guards leveraged their position to gain favor with influential patrons or secure rewards for loyal service. Interactions with infamous prisoners. Some of the tower's most notorious prisoners, such as the princes in the tower or political dissidents, required particularly vigilant guards. The psychological burden of watching over someone whose life might end at any moment added complexity to the guard's role. Guards had to anticipate the needs and intentions of prisoners, sometimes detecting plots or clandestine communications. Their reports could influence royal decisions, potentially altering the course of political events. The weight of responsibility was immense, and history records both heroes and villains among these men, some who showed mercy and others who abused their authority. Legacy of the Guards. The stories of tower guards provide a unique perspective on medieval life, revealing the human dimensions of a place often associated with fear and punishment. While prisoners captured attention for their dramatic tales, the guards' experiences show how daily life, duty, and social negotiation shaped the realities of confinement. The tower was a living ecosystem where prisoners, guards, and attendants all interacted within a rigid yet delicate hierarchy. The guards were both enforcers and participants in the drama of imprisonment, their decisions subtly shaping outcomes in ways often invisible to history. Through surviving records, logs, letters, and anecdotes, we glimpse a world where loyalty, cunning, and endurance determined not only survival for prisoners, but also the reputation and fortunes of those who guarded them. These men stood at the intersection of authority and vulnerability, embodying the intricate human balance of power, responsibility, and morality that defined life inside the Tower of London. Section 12. Escape attempts and ingenious plots within the tower. The Tower of London, despite its formidable stone walls, moats, and vigilant guards, was not impervious to human ingenuity. Over the centuries, prisoners attempted a wide range of escape strategies, ranging from clever deception to daring physical feats. Each escape attempt tells a story of courage, desperation, and sometimes sheer absurdity, offering a glimpse into the human spirit under extreme confinement. The psychology of desperation. Prisoners in the tower faced the daunting reality of their environment. Walls designed for security, watchful guards, and limited contact with the outside world. For those facing political persecution or execution, the stakes were immense. Desperation became a powerful motivator, leading prisoners to consider almost any plan to regain freedom, regardless of the danger involved. This psychological pressure created a fertile ground for both ingenuity and desperation-driven mistakes. Some prisoners meticulously planned their escapes for months, secretly mapping corridors, bribing guards, and improvising tools from everyday objects. Others acted impulsively, seizing fleeting opportunities that, while courageous, often ended tragically. Bribery and corruption. One of the most common strategies for escaping the tower involved bribing guards or attendants. The guards' position gave them tremendous influence over a prisoner's daily life, including access to food, clothing, and information. A well-placed bribe could result in keys, unlocked doors, or the creation of false records that allowed a prisoner to move unnoticed. Historical records indicate that some guards accepted bribes while others refused, valuing loyalty or fearing the severe consequences of aiding an escape. For prisoners, bribery required careful negotiation, secrecy, and in some cases, a deep understanding of human psychology. A single misstep could lead to exposure and harsher confinement, illustrating the delicate balance of risk and reward in these schemes. Ingenious tools and disguises. Prisoners often improvised tools from everyday items to aid in their escape. Hairpins, spoons, and scraps of metal could be fashioned into lockpicks or cutting instruments. Even seemingly mundane items like bedsheets and clothing were transformed into ropes or disguises, enabling prisoners to navigate guards or scale walls. Disguises were another effective tactic. Some prisoners attempted to mimic guards or attendants, blending in during routine inspections or transitions between areas. Success required careful observation of guard routines, attire, and behavior. Any inconsistency could arouse suspicion, making these attempts a risky but potentially rewarding strategy. Physical feats and ingenious engineering. Beyond bribery and disguise, some prisoners relied on sheer physical ingenuity. Stories from the tower suggest that prisoners sometimes tunneled through walls or ceilings, using rudimentary tools to create hidden passages. Others attempted to descend moats or scale towers using improvised ropes and pulleys. These feats required meticulous planning, endurance, and timing. Guards were alert, and the tower's architecture was intentionally intimidating. High walls, narrow staircases, and limited access points made escape extremely difficult. Yet the persistence of prisoners highlights their creativity and determination, turning the tower into a testing ground for human resourcefulness under extreme constraint. Famous escape attempts throughout history. A few escape attempts from the tower became particularly notable. While many were unsuccessful, their stories have persisted as symbols of daring and ingenuity. For instance, in one account, a noble prisoner allegedly used a hidden rope to descend from a tower window, evading guards and disappearing into the night. In another, political prisoners coordinated with outside allies, sending secret messages to arrange extraction at a precise time. Even failed attempts left behind legacies of ingenuity, inspiring future prisoners or influencing security practices. Each plan, successful or not, reflected a deep understanding of the tower's vulnerabilities and a willingness to take extraordinary risks in the pursuit of freedom. The role of allies and communication. Some prisoners relied heavily on outside help. Friends, family, or political allies could smuggle in tools, provide intelligence, or coordinate distractions. Messages were often concealed within food, clothing, or correspondence, requiring ingenuity and careful timing. The collaboration between prisoners and allies underscores the social dimension of escape attempts. No plan succeeded entirely on isolation alone. Communication with the outside world was both a lifeline and a risk. Guards monitored letters and visitors, and intercepting messages could lead to stricter confinement or punitive measures. The delicate art of secret communication illustrates the mental acuity required to navigate the tower's complex social and physical environment. Lessons from escape attempts. While the Tower of London remained largely secure, the numerous escape attempts provide insight into medieval strategy, psychology, and resilience. They reveal the extraordinary lengths humans will go to reclaim autonomy and the creative problem-solving that emerges under extreme pressure. Guards had to remain vigilant, constantly adapting to new tactics and learning from past incidents. Prisoners' ingenuity, in turn, drove innovation in security measures, making the tower an evolving system of control and counter-control. This dynamic interaction reflects the broader interplay of power, intelligence, and survival that defines life within this iconic fortress. Enduring fascination. Stories of escape attempts capture the imagination because they combine danger, cleverness, and drama. They offer a window into human determination, showing that even in the most secure environments, creativity and courage can challenge authority. These tales contribute to the enduring mystique of the Tower of London, transforming it from a static monument into a living stage for human endeavor, conflict, and ingenuity. The legacy of these escapes reminds us that the tower, while imposing, was not just a prison. It was a theater of strategy, courage, and power, and human will, where each prisoner's attempt at freedom left an indelible mark on history. Section 13. The Tower's role in political intrigue and power struggles. The Tower of London was more than just a prison. It was a symbol of authority and a hub of political intrigue. Its stone walls not only confined individuals, but also reflected the shifting dynamics of power, loyalty, and fear in medieval England. Over centuries, the tower played a pivotal role in political maneuvering, hosting prisoners whose fates could determine the course of the kingdom. From nobles accused of treason to high-ranking officials caught in conspiracies, the tower's history is intertwined with the rise and fall of influential figures. A political prison like no other. Unlike ordinary prisons of the medieval era, the tower was reserved for those whose status, influence, or actions posed a threat to the crown. Its occupants were not common criminals, but key players in the political landscape. Arrests were often publicized, serving as warnings to others and reinforcing royal authority. However, the tower's walls also became a private theater where intrigue, negotiation, and secret plotting occurred away from public eyes. Political prisoners ranged from dukes and earls to ambitious courtiers and foreign envoys. Their detention was rarely merely punitive. It was often strategic. Kings and queens used the tower to control succession, suppress dissent, and manipulate alliances, highlighting its dual role as a site of confinement and a tool of governance. Famous prisoners and their plots. Some of the most dramatic episodes in the tower's history involve famous prisoners whose fates were entwined with national politics. For example, the imprisonment of the princes in the tower, Edward V and his brother Richard, sparked speculation about royal succession, betrayal, and murder. Their mysterious disappearance remains one of England's enduring historical enigmas, illustrating how the Tower could serve as both a prison and a stage for political drama. Other notable figures, such as Thomas More and Anne Boleyn, demonstrate the precarious nature of power. More, the esteemed statesman, faced execution after opposing King Henry VIII's religious policies, while Anne Boleyn, the Queen herself, was imprisoned and later executed on charges widely believed to be politically motivated. Their stories exemplify how the Tower was integral to the Crown's ability to assert dominance, silencing opponents and reshaping political landscapes. secret communications, and plots. Political prisoners often engaged in subtle acts of resistance or intrigue, exploiting the tower's relatively contained environment to maintain influence. Hidden letters, secret messengers, and covert negotiations were common. Courtiers and prisoners alike relied on allies both inside and outside the tower to manipulate outcomes, sway decisions, or orchestrate plots. The tower's role as a political instrument also extended to psychological strategy. Imprisonment itself could intimidate factions, destabilize loyalty, or extract confessions under threat of execution. By controlling who remained free and who was detained, the monarchy could shape alliances and manage threats in ways that extended far beyond the tower's walls. Trials and public spectacle. Many prisoners in the tower faced trials that were as much about political theater as legal judgment. The trial of Anne Boleyn, for instance, was highly orchestrated to reinforce the king's authority and quell dissent. Public perception mattered immensely. Executions, parades, and interrogations were designed to demonstrate the consequences of opposing the crown. The tower's chambers thus functioned as both a private cell and a public stage. The tension between secrecy and spectacle underscores its role as a tool of governance, highlighting the intricate balance between power, fear, and influence in medieval society. Foreign diplomacy and spies. The tower also served as a holding place for foreign dignitaries and spies, reflecting its importance in England's diplomatic strategies. Prisoners could be interrogated, bribed, or coerced into providing intelligence, making the tower a hub of espionage as well as imprisonment. Such interactions illustrate how political power extended into intelligence gathering, negotiation, and subtle manipulation, activities that often occurred within the tower's fortified walls, out of public view. The treatment of foreign prisoners was carefully calibrated. While some were afforded privileges reflecting their status, others faced harsh confinement to pressure compliance or extract critical information. This dual approach of diplomacy and intimidation reflects the tower's unique position at the intersection of domestic politics and international relations. Legacy of political intrigue. The tower's reputation as a site of political intrigue endures because it was not merely a place of confinement, but a stage where human ambition, loyalty, and betrayal played out. Every prisoner's story contributed to a broader narrative of power, fear, and control, offering insight into the strategies that medieval rulers employed to consolidate authority. The interplay of imprisonment, negotiation, and power, and manipulation within the tower highlights its enduring role as a symbol of governance, where walls could contain not only people, but also ideas, influence, and the delicate balance of power. It reminds us that the tower's historical significance extends far beyond its architecture. It is a testament to the complex and often perilous nature of political life in medieval England. Section 14. Daily life and survival strategies of prisoners in the tower. Life inside the Tower of London was a world apart from the bustling streets of medieval London. While it stood as a formidable symbol of royal authority, within its walls, prisoners, regardless of rank, faced daily routines that combined monotony, fear, and uncertainty. The tower's reputation for intrigue and terror is well known, but the daily existence of those imprisoned there reveals a more nuanced story of survival, adaptation, and resilience. Daily routine and confinement. For most prisoners, life began and ended within the tower's cold stone walls. Unlike modern prisons, where structured schedules exist, medieval detention offered prisoners little control over their time. Days could stretch endlessly, punctuated only by meals, interrogations, or the rare visit from allies or family. Those confined in the tower often found themselves in small, sparsely furnished rooms with minimal comforts. Windows, if present, were narrow and barred, casting the rooms in perpetual dimness, while damp floors and drafty walls added to the physical discomfort. Prisoners had to cope with isolation, which weighed heavily on both mind and body. For nobles and officials, access to books, writing materials, or correspondence could provide mental stimulation and a connection to the outside world. Yet these privileges were often limited or revoked as punishment. The psychological strain of confinement was compounded by uncertainty about one's fate, with execution, release, or long-term imprisonment looming as possible outcomes. Food, water, and health, sustenance in the tower was a daily challenge. Diets varied greatly depending on social status, royal favor, or available resources. Wealthy prisoners sometimes received food from friends or family, while less influential detainees relied on what was provided by the warders. Meals often consisted of stale bread, thin broths, and occasional meat, insufficient for sustaining both physical strength and morale over time. Access to clean water was critical, yet the damp, unsanitary conditions could make illness a constant threat. Disease was common: smallpox, dysentery, and respiratory infections spread rapidly in the tower's enclosed spaces. Prisoners had to adopt strategies to survive, sharing limited blankets, keeping personal spaces as clean as possible, and sometimes using herbs or home remedies to counter illness. The ability to maintain health often determined one's capacity to endure both the physical and psychological challenges of imprisonment. Social hierarchies and interactions. Interestingly, even within confinement, social structures emerged. Nobles and high-ranking prisoners could sometimes assert authority over lower-status inmates or receive preferential treatment. These hierarchies influenced access to resources, space, and even news from the outside world. Prisoners learned to navigate alliances and rivalries, sometimes leveraging favors, information, or intimidation to secure advantages. Interactions with guards were equally strategic. While some warders exercised strict control, others were open to bribery or negotiation, providing opportunities for prisoners to acquire essentials, gain information, or even arrange secret communications. This delicate dance between authority and subversion highlights the complex social ecology that developed within the tower's walls. Strategies for mental resilience. Surviving the tower was not only a physical challenge, but also a mental one. Prisoners often developed routines or rituals to preserve sanity and maintain hope. Writing letters, keeping journals, or engaging in quiet study offered a sense of purpose and connection. Religious practices, prayer, meditation, or attending private services provided comfort, framing their confinement within a larger spiritual narrative. Entertainment, when available, played a crucial role in mental resilience. Board games, chess, or storytelling could occupy hours and allow prisoners to retain a sense of agency and engagement, despite the restrictive environment. These small diversions were essential, offering brief escapes from the monotony and fear that otherwise defined life in the tower. Secrets, smuggling, and communication. Survival also meant navigating the tower's strict regulations to maintain contact with the outside world. Prisoners often relied on trusted messengers, bribed guards, or hidden notes to exchange information, send pleas for assistance, or plot political maneuvers. Such clandestine activities required creativity and courage, as discovery could lead to harsher confinement, punishment, or death. The tower's architecture, narrow staircases, secret passageways, and hidden recesses sometimes aided these efforts. Prisoners adept at exploiting these features could smuggle letters or items undetected, allowing them to retain a thread of influence beyond the tower walls. Coping with fear and uncertainty. Perhaps the most daunting aspect of life in the tower was the constant specter of execution. Even the most privileged prisoners faced the looming threat of sudden death, which shaped both behavior and psychology. Fear was omnipresent, and strategies for coping ranged from stoic acceptance to desperate negotiation. Some prisoners sought to cultivate favor with their captors, while others focused inward, finding solace in prayer, reflection, or intellectual pursuits. The uncertainty also fostered ingenuity. Prisoners learned to maximize limited resources, negotiate subtle advantages, and maintain resilience in the face of relentless psychological pressure. It was a life that demanded constant vigilance, adaptation, and courage, proving that survival was as much a mental challenge as a physical one. Legacy of the prisoner's experience. The Tower of London's prisoners left behind a complex legacy of human resilience. Diaries, letters, and historical accounts provide a window into their daily lives, revealing that even in extreme confinement, individuals found ways to preserve dignity, exercise agency, and navigate political landscapes. Their experiences remind us that survival in such conditions was a multidimensional struggle, blending physical endurance, social negotiation, and mental fortitude. In essence, life in the tower was a delicate balance between control and resistance, fear and hope, confinement and cunning. Each prisoner's story contributes to a broader understanding of the tower as both a symbol of authority and a crucible of human resilience. The Tower of London remains an enduring symbol of power, fear, and intrigue. Its walls witnessed countless dramas, from high-stakes political intrigue to the quiet endurance of prisoners' daily lives. By examining these experiences, we gain insight not only into the mechanics of medieval imprisonment, but also into the remarkable human capacity for adaptation and survival under extreme conditions. The tower's history is a reminder that even within walls built for confinement, the spirit of those within could remain unbroken, navigating fear and uncertainty with courage, wit, and resilience.